High levels of microplastics in ocean water have been linked to a higher prevalence of cognitive and other types of neurological dysfunction in individuals living in U.S. coastal communities. Understanding that scientists are finding an association between higher levels of seawater contamination with microplastics and neurological disability in local residents brings to mind why this is happening. How are the microplastics interacting with people's nervous systems? Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm so glad you're here. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I am passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story and build your most beautiful future. Today, on this short talk on Talks with Dr. Shafer, I want to talk about something that you might have heard recently in the news. Microplastics, specifically microplastics and your brain. On this short talk, we are going to be talking about mastering your health and mind through taking preventive steps to protect your most important and precious instrument, your brain. This week's episode was inspired by a health headline that came out this weekend about microplastics and related neurological disabilities. Medscape published the quote, "High levels of microplastics in ocean water have been linked to a higher prevalence of cognitive and other types of neurological dysfunction in individuals living in U.S. coastal communities." That's scary. That's frightening, considering most of us are aware of how much plastic and therefore microplastics and nanoplastics have become a part of our reality throughout our environment. The air we breathe, the water we drink, even in soils and in our food supply. Dr. Sarju Ganatra, MD, a researcher involved in the study, was quoted to have said that, quote, "Our study builds upon the emerging body of evidence linking microplastic exposure to neurotoxic effects by demonstrating a population-level association between marine microplastic pollution and increased prevalence of neurologic disabilities in coastal U.S. communities." Findings of this study will be presented at the American Academy of Neurology annual meeting in April 2025. It is important to note that this study does not show causation or demonstrate causation that microplastics cause neurological disabilities. What the study does is it shows an association between higher amounts of microplastics in the water of coastal communities and higher rates of neurological disabilities that affect things like our memory, thinking, how we move, and other activities of living. What kind of plastics are we talking about when we discuss microplastics? Marine microplastics are less than 5 millimeters long, microscopically small, and are found in our oceans and seas across the globe. They originate from larger pieces of plastic like bottles, fishing nets, and other plastic sources like bags. When we look at studies, it is important to consider the amount of data that scientists reviewed to come to the study's conclusion. This study looked at 218 different coastal counties in 22 states across the United States. Researchers examined marine microplastic levels across these counties and divided them into 4 groups with the lowest to highest amount of microplastics per measurement of ocean surface water. Then, researchers examined the rates of disability in residents of these areas with regards to memory and thinking, mobility, self-care, which is another way of saying performing things of our daily activities like bathing, dressing, getting around our home, and independent living, such as the ability to manage one's own finances, handle transportation, and shopping for oneself. This study is an important piece of a bigger puzzle regarding the potential negative effects of plastic in our environments and our brains. Understanding that scientists are finding an association between higher levels of seawater contamination with microplastics and neurological disability in local residents brings to mind why this is happening. How are the microplastics interacting with people's nervous systems? Another study published this year that raises concern for plastics and the nervous system may shed light on why microplastics and nanoplastics, even smaller yet, are affecting people's nervous systems. A study performed at the University of New Mexico found that microplastics are present in human brains and at a higher concentration in brains than in other organs. The microplastics were measured in nanometers and were able to cross what's called the blood-brain barrier, the barrier between our blood supply and our brain, which is previously felt to be almost impenetrable to outside invaders. In addition to this shocking finding, the accumulation of plastics in the brain appears to be increasing over time at alarming rates. The study found an increase of 50% over just 8 years in the burden of microplastics and nanoplastics in samples of the frontal cortex of study subjects examined in 2016 compared to samples from 2024. The study was led by toxicologist Matthew Campen, a PhD, distinguished and Regents Professor of the UNM College of Pharmacy. Dr. Campen has been quoted to say that this really changes the landscape. It makes it so much more personal. And he went on to say that he never would have imagined that the burden was this high. Quote, "I certainly don't feel comfortable with this much plastic in my brain, and I don't need to wait around 30 more years to find out what happens if the concentrations quadruple." End quote. A poignant point made by Dr. Campen, as many of us are exposed to microplastics and nanoplastics, tiny broken down particles, in our drinking water and food consumption, particularly meat products, regularly. And without intervention, we will continue to be exposed over time. The most common plastic found in the study is called polyethylene, about 75% of the plastics found on average in the study. Polyethylene is a type of plastic used in plastic bags and packaging that holds food and drinks. Dr. Campen found that the brain tissue of normal study participants were 4,800 micrograms per gram, or 0.48% by weight, the size of a standard plastic spoon. That's right. Most of us in our middle age now are walking around with enough plastic to make a plastic spoon in our brains. The study found that participants who had a diagnosis of dementia had a much higher amount of plastic, up to 10 times as much, in their brains as study subjects without a diagnosis of dementia. While this study was not designed to determine whether the higher microplastic burden was causative regarding the development of dementia versus the higher degree of microplastics potentially was due to the presence of dementia in the subject and how that affects the brain, such as the brain's ability to clear microplastics, causing them to accumulate. While we don't yet know causation, this study's findings are cause for concern and heightened awareness to the dangers of microplastics and nanoplastics in our environment. There is concern that microplastics could block blood flow in capillaries, the very small blood vessels in our brain and body, and that they also may interfere with our nervous system by disrupting connections between neurons, the cells that make up our nervous system, or that the microplastics and nanoplastics may serve to contribute to the collection of proteins seen in the brains of people with Alzheimer's dementia. The mechanism is unclear and requires further research. So, where are these microplastics that are being deposited in our brains and bodies coming from? Researchers suspect that one contributor is through our food sources, such as meat. Fish has been found to have microplastics in it, as has meat from the commercial meat industry, potentially due to animals ingesting plastic-contaminated food sources and water, leading to what is known as biomagnification, or higher amounts of plastic in animals that are larger and or higher up on the food chain, such as larger fish. A study published in January that looked at mice showed that when the study mice were given water with microplastics, researchers were able to trace how the microplastics were taken in by immune cells, which then ended up in the small blood cells in the brain, blocking them. This gives some insight into how microplastics may potentially lead to negative impacts on our brains. In 2023, a study by Assistant Professor Jamie Ross's lab that studied mice exposed to drinking water laced with microplastics found that after 3 weeks of exposure, the microplastic particles were found to have bioaccumulated in the mice's brain, along with every other organ, and study mice exhibited behaviors similar to what is seen in humans diagnosed with dementia. And there are also concerns for cardiovascular health as well, with a 2024 study on patients undergoing heart surgery finding that study participants with microplastics or nanoplastics in a main artery were at a 4.5 times higher risk of heart attack, stroke, or death in the next 3 years after surgery compared to participants in the study without plastics in their main coronary arteries. Other studies have found plastics in the placenta, the testicles, kidneys, and liver of study participants as well. Other than potentially posing an obstructive or inflammatory threat, the chemicals in nanoplastics and microplastics can potentially interrupt cellular processes as well, and known endocrine disruptive chemicals can affect the human reproductive system developmentally in regards to things like fertility, and these are found in microplastics, such as bisphenols, phthalates, flame retardants, PFAS, and heavy metals. So what should we do? It's important not to panic, but also to be aware of the findings of recent studies regarding microplastics, nanoplastics, and your health, and taking steps to limit single-use plastic use in your life so that we are not continuing to contribute greatly to this problem. It is also helpful to avoid heating plastics with food or beverage in them, such as in the microwave, as heating plastics can lead to leaching of the microplastics from the container directly into your food. Packing lunches for yourself or for the kids in safe materials with limited plastic packaging and with non-plastic utensils can decrease single-use plastic as well, as can bringing a travel mug to use at a coffee shop when you enjoy coffee out of the home. And when it comes to your drinking water, using filtration systems that remove microplastics and nanoplastics can be important to reduce exposure. Being mindful of what we eat and minimizing or avoiding sources of micro and nanoplastics when able is another step that we can take. I hope that this short talk on microplastics, nanoplastics, and your brain health has been helpful for you. If you have questions or comments, please let us know, and let us know if there's a topic that you would like us to cover here on our short talks on Talks with Dr. Shafer. We would love to hear from you. Please subscribe to the show so that you don't miss our upcoming inspiring guest episodes with people who have reclaimed their story and are living incredible and inspiring lives, and short talks like today where we do things like work on mastering our mindset and making good choices for our health from a neuroscience-informed perspective. Until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.